The night was thick with tension, the hum of streetlights buzzing faintly over the near-empty road. Officer Jake Carter leaned against his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee, his eyes scanning the darkness for something, anything, to break the monotony. That's when he saw it. A black sedan rolled past the intersection, its headlights cutting through the damp air. His gaze narrowed. The car wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving. It was just there. Still, something inside him itched. Maybe it was the late hour, maybe it was habit, but mostly it was instinct. With a flick of his wrist, Carter switched on his sirens. The red and blue lights painted the road in flashing colors as the sedan obediently slowed to the side. He took his time, making sure the driver felt the weight of waiting. That was part of the game. When he finally approached, he tapped on the window with unnecessary force. The glass rolled down, revealing a composed black woman in her mid-30s. She had sharp eyes, high cheekbones, and a presence that didn't quite fit the usual fear or submission he expected. "License and registration," Carter ordered, his voice clipped. The woman didn't flinch. Without a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and handed over her ID. He snatched it from her fingers, glancing at the name. "Lauren Brooks," he muttered, rolling the name around his tongue like it meant something. Still, she remained silent. No attitude, no complaints, just calm. That annoyed him. He liked it when they got nervous, when they stammered, when they gave him a reason. "Step out of the vehicle," he said suddenly. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, officer?" Carter's lips curled into a smirk. "Just a routine check. Step out." She sighed but complied, pushing open the door and stepping onto the cold pavement. She was dressed in a fitted navy blue blazer, slacks and low heels, not the usual attire of someone getting pulled over at night. He circled her like a predator, sizing up its prey. "You in a hurry, Miss Brooks?" "I'd like to get home," she replied, her voice even. Carter chuckled. "See, that's the thing. You're out here driving in the middle of the night. That's suspicious." Lauren tilted her head slightly. "Is it?" Something about her tone got under his skin. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You people always think you're so damn smart, don't you?" For the first time she smiled, not the kind of smile that meant submission, but one laced with something he couldn't quite place. Confidence, amusement. "You have no idea who I am?" she said softly. Carter let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, yeah? Should I?" She didn't answer. She simply held his gaze, her silence heavier than any words she could have spoken. That unsettled him. He was used to anger, frustration, fear. Not this. But he wasn't done. He stepped closer, close enough to make it clear who was in charge. "Now, if you don't mind, I think I'll take my time checking things out. Wouldn't want to let anyone suspicious just drive off now, would we?" He expected her to break, to protest, to raise her voice, to do something that would justify the way he was handling this. But Lauren Brooks just exhaled slowly, like she already knew how this was going to end. And Officer Carter had no idea what was coming. Dr. Olivia Parker had spent years climbing the ranks of law enforcement, breaking barriers in a system designed to keep people like her out. With a sharp mind, unshakable composure, and a reputation for taking down corruption, she was the last person Officer Jake Carter should have chosen to harass. The irony of the situation was almost poetic. Just hours ago, Olivia had been in a high-level meeting, discussing the department's deep-rooted issues with systemic racism and the urgent need for reform. Her promotion to police commissioner had been historic, one of the few black women to ever hold such a position in the city. But power didn't come without a fight. Cops like Carter were exactly the problem she had been hired to fix. Officers who believed their badge gave them unchecked authority, who saw black citizens as automatic suspects. Olivia had spent her career exposing men like him, men who weaponized their positions to intimidate, humiliate, and discriminate. And now, standing under the harsh glow of the streetlights, she was looking directly into the eyes of everything she had been fighting against. Officer Jake Carter wasn't just any cop. He was the type who had thrived in the system for years without consequence. With his neatly pressed uniform, squared jaw, and an air of self-importance, he carried himself like he owned the streets. To him, the world was simple. Black people needed to know their place. He had grown up believing that law enforcement wasn't about justice. It was about control. Every traffic stop, every pat-down, every aggressive, routine check was his way of reinforcing that belief. Carter had been with the department for nearly a decade, and in that time he had built a solid reputation. Not for bravery, not for good police work, but for knowing how to handle people. He knew which neighborhoods to patrol, which people to target, and, most importantly, how to bend the rules just enough to stay out of trouble. Complaints against him? Plenty. But they never went anywhere. The department had always protected its own, and Carter had never faced any real consequences for his actions. He took pride in that. So, when he pulled over a black woman in a nice car late at night, it was instinct. He hadn't even considered that she might be someone important. To him, she was just another person he could intimidate. Another nobody. Olivia had known from the beginning that change wouldn't come easy. She had seen firsthand how officers like Carter were emboldened by a system that shielded them. Even good cops, those who wanted to do the right thing, were often powerless against the deeply ingrained culture of silence and protection. She had spent years navigating that system, trying to make meaningful reforms, but every step forward came with resistance. There were officers who saw her as a threat, who whispered behind her back, questioning her authority. Now, as she stood under the scrutiny of a man who had no idea who she was, she felt the weight of that struggle pressing down on her. She could have revealed herself right then, could have pulled out her badge and watched his arrogance crumble. But that wasn't the point. She needed to see how far he would go. Because this wasn't just about her. This was about every black man and woman who had been stopped, harassed, and humiliated by officers like Carter. And this time, there would be consequences. Carter smirked, still oblivious to the reality of the situation. To him, Olivia Parker was just another uppity black woman who needed to be put in her place. "Let's take this downtown," he said, gesturing toward his patrol car. Olivia didn't resist. She simply gave him a look, one that held something he couldn't quite read, not fear, not anger, just certainty. As Carter placed the cuffs around her wrists, he had no idea he was tightening a noose around his own career. Because by the time the sun rose, the entire department would know exactly who Dr. Olivia Parker was. And Officer Jake Carter? His days of unchecked power were about to come crashing down. Officer Jake Carter strolled into the department, his usual cocky swagger intact. To him, last night had been nothing more than routine. Another traffic stop, another black woman who thought she was too good to answer to him. He didn't even remember her name. Why would he? He had done worse before and walked away without a scratch. What was one more name on the list of people who hated him? He grabbed a coffee from the break room, nodding at a few officers who greeted him. The department was buzzing with energy, but something felt. There was a hushed tension in the air, whispered conversations happening in corners. He caught a few glances thrown his way, but dismissed them. Probably just another department shakeup. Then Sergeant Daniels called out, "Carter, get in the conference room. Mandatory briefing." Carter rolled his eyes and took another sip of his coffee. Same old, same old. He had no idea his entire world was about to implode. The conference room was packed. Officers, detectives, higher-ups, all present, all unusually attentive. At the front of the room stood Captain Reynolds, the department veteran who had been running things for years. Carter found a seat near the back barely paying attention. That was until Reynolds cleared his throat and spoke. "Before we begin, I'd like to introduce someone very important. Our department has undergone a major leadership change, and starting today, we have a new police commissioner." Murmurs rippled through the room. Carter barely reacted. He had heard the rumors about some new commissioner being appointed, but he never cared much for politics. To him, it didn't matter who sat at the top. Nothing ever really changed. But then Reynolds stepped aside, and the woman behind him moved forward. And Carter felt the air leave his lungs. Dr. Olivia Parker. The same woman he had pulled over last night. The same woman he had humiliated, talked down to, and cuffed like a criminal. She stood there, composed, elegant, with a presence so powerful it made the entire room feel smaller. She scanned the crowd slowly, taking in every face until her eyes landed directly on him. And then she smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a warm one. It was cold, calculated, the kind of smile that made a man's blood turn to ice. Carter's body locked up, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched under the table. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Olivia let the silence stretch, allowing Carter to sit in his own horror for a moment before she spoke. "Good morning, officers. I know some of you may not be familiar with me, but trust me, you will be—" There was something sharp in her tone, something unshakable. She wasn't here to be liked. She wasn't here to maintain the status quo. "This department has a long history, some of it honorable, some of it far less so." Her gaze swept the room before locking onto Carter again. "And let's be clear, I'm here to fix what's broken." Carter's throat felt dry. His mind raced, replaying every second of last night's encounter. Did she already report him? Did she plan to fire him in front of everyone? He stole a glance around the room. No one was looking at him. Not yet. But they would. He was trapped, and for the first time in his career he felt real, paralyzing fear. What terrified him the most wasn't the fact that she was his new boss. It was the fact that she hadn't said anything. If she had walked in and immediately exposed him, he could have prepared a defense. He could have twisted the story, played it off as a misunderstanding, maybe even pulled some favors. But she wasn't doing that. She was waiting, watching, letting him suffer in silence, knowing that every second that passed only tightened the noose around his neck. This wasn't just about punishing him. This was about control. And Officer Jake Carter was no longer the one in power. Carter felt like a man walking on a frozen lake, hearing the ice crack beneath his feet, but not knowing when he'd plunge into the freezing abyss. He paced in the locker room, his mind racing. What the hell was he supposed to do? He needed backup, someone who could help him get out of this mess before it was too late. He spotted two familiar faces, Detective Ryan Brooks and Officer Tom Hensley, his longtime drinking buddies and fellow enforcers of the department's unspoken rule, protect your own no matter what. "Brooks?" "Hensley, we got a problem," Carter muttered, keeping his voice low. Brooks raised an eyebrow, stuffing his gun into his holster. "That bad?" Carter exhaled sharply. "Worse. Remember that black chick I pulled over last night? The one with the attitude?" Hensley scoffed. "Yeah? What about her?" Carter clenched his jaw. "She's our new commissioner." There was a beat of silence before both men let out curses. "Are you kidding me?" Brooks whispered harshly. "She didn't tell you who she was?" "She didn't need to." Carter gritted his teeth. "I treated her like every other." He stopped himself, but they all knew what he meant. Hensley shook his head. "Damn. So, what now? She coming for you?" Carter ran a hand over his face. "Not yet. That's the worst part. She hasn't said a damn thing. Just looked at me like she already had my obituary written." Brooks narrowed his eyes. "Then we need to make sure she never gets the chance to use it." They huddled together, speaking in hushed voices. "We have options," Hensley said. "She's new here. Means she doesn't have deep roots yet. We hit her fast before she builds her power." Carter's stomach twisted. He knew how this game was played. He had used it against plenty of officers who refused to play along with the system. But Olivia Parker? She wasn't just some rookie detective. "She's a nobody," Brooks cut in. "Yeah, she's got the title, but nobody respects an outsider, especially one who wants to fix things." He made air quotes with his fingers. Carter nodded slowly. "So, what are you saying?" "We control the narrative before she does," Brooks said. "Start planting rumors, make her look incompetent, dig into her past. There's got to be something. If we can get the right people whispering in the mayor's ear, we can get her out before she even settles in." Carter exhaled. It was a risky play, but what other choice did he have? "All right," he muttered. "Let's do it." While Carter and his corrupt allies schemed, Olivia Parker sat in her new office, scrolling through police records. She wasn't a fool. She knew the department was filled with men like Carter, entitled, corrupt, and convinced they were untouchable. But she wasn't here to play their game. She was here to end it. Her fingers moved swiftly, pulling up personnel files, disciplinary records, and internal complaints. Some names showed up more than others. And then, as she suspected, Jake Carter. His name appeared in multiple internal complaints: excessive force, racial profiling, misconduct reports, all dismissed without investigation. Her jaw tightened. "You think you've been getting away with this forever, don't you?" she thought to herself. She leaned back in her chair, a small, knowing smile creeping onto her lips. That time was over. That night, Carter was leaving the precinct when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Detective Marcus Hill, one of the few black officers in the department. Hill's face was unreadable, but there was a weight behind his words. "You need to be careful, Carter." Carter frowned. "Careful of what?" Hill took a slow breath. "She's not just your boss. She's here to clean house." Carter scoffed, playing it off, but his pulse quickened. "What? She got you in her pocket already?" Hill shook his head. "Nah, man. I'm just saying, people like her don't come in without a plan." Then he lowered his voice. "And trust me, you're already on her list." Carter forced a laugh, clapping Hill on the shoulder. "Appreciate the concern, Hill, but I think I can handle one woman." Hill just looked at him for a long moment before walking away. And for the first time that day, Carter felt genuinely uneasy. That night, Carter, Brooks, and Hensley met in a dimly lit bar, drinks in hand, whispering over the music. "We move now?" Brooks insisted. "First, we get the media talking. Someone in the press will eat up a good corruption story." Hensley nodded. "We leak a rumor, say she was dirty in her last department, maybe even hint that she got her promotion for the wrong reasons." Carter exhaled, gripping his drink. He wasn't stupid. This was war. If Olivia Parker thought she could take him down, she was about to learn the hard way. He'd make sure she went down first. Carter leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face as he scrolled through the latest news article. New police commissioner accused of favoring black officers' internal divide, growing in the department. It was all going exactly as planned. Brooks and Hensley had done their job well, feeding fabricated stories to reporters who were always hungry for controversy. They had planted the idea that Olivia Parker wasn't a reformer. She was a divisive figure, using her power to push an agenda that prioritized black officers over others. The public was already starting to react. Comment sections flooded with outrage, debates igniting on social media. The department, once resistant but quiet, now buzzed with rumors. And just like that, Olivia was on the defensive. Or so Carter thought. The plan was simple but effective. A few well-placed anonymous tips. A leaked internal memo. claiming Olivia was secretly pushing policies that only benefited black officers. A couple of bitter officers willing to talk to the press anonymously about how the new leadership was making them feel unfairly targeted. Within 48 hours, the department was divided. Some believed the rumors, others dismissed them. The mayor's office was already asking questions. And that's when Carter saw the first real crack in Olivia's armor. During the morning briefing, she looked at her officers, her face as unreadable as ever, but there was something different. For the first time, she looked tired. Carter smirked. She's finally feeling the pressure. Or so he thought. What Carter didn't realize was Olivia had been ready for this. She had been in this game long enough to know how men like him operated. She had anticipated the smear campaign before she even set foot in this department. While Carter was busy spreading lies, Olivia had been collecting the truth. That afternoon, while Carter was celebrating the chaos, Olivia held a press conference. Standing at the podium, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, she didn't waste time defending herself. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She went on the offensive. Over the past few days, there has been an attempt to discredit my leadership, she said calmly, an attempt fueled by lies, manipulation, and desperation. She paused, letting the words sink in. So, let's talk about facts instead. And then she dropped the bombshell. She revealed a long-hidden report detailing years of systemic racism, abuse, and cover-ups within the police department. She named names, and at the top of the list, Officer Jake Carter. The moment Carter saw his name flash on the screen behind Olivia, his stomach dropped. His entire career, his entire shield of untouchability was suddenly ripped away. The report exposed multiple complaints against him for racial profiling, body cam footage mysteriously lost in cases involving black civilians, allegations of excessive force, all of which had been swept under the rug. And now, the world knew. The room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, questions flying. But Olivia wasn't done. She turned to the audience and dropped the final blow. This department is not a playground for corruption, she said, and officers who think they are above accountability will soon find out otherwise. Her eyes locked onto Carter's from across the screen. She knew. And for the first time in his career, Carter was actually afraid. Back at the precinct, Carter sat in his office, his fists clenched, his face red with rage. "How the hell did she get that report?" he snapped at Brooks and Hensley. Brooks shook his head. "I don't know, man. We buried that years ago." Hensley gritted his teeth. "She's got people feeding her intel. Someone in the department flipped." Carter exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He should be running, planning his exit. But he couldn't. His ego wouldn't let him. "I don't care how much dirt she has," he growled. "We're not done yet." His eyes darkened as an idea formed in his mind. If she wants a war, then she'll get one. Carter sat in his office, his hands clenched into fists. The past 48 hours had been a nightmare. The media storm hadn't died down, it had only grown stronger. Olivia's press conference had sent shockwaves through the department. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from reporters, angry messages from officers who were now trying to distance themselves from him. Even his closest allies, Brooks and Hensley, were avoiding him. And then the final blow came. A department-wide email from Olivia's office. "Effective immediately. An internal investigation has been launched into allegations of corruption, racial misconduct, and abuse of power within the force. Officers found guilty will face full disciplinary action." At the bottom of the email, his name was listed first. His stomach twisted into knots. He had been in trouble before, but this was different. Because now, he had no protection left. Carter exposed. The investigation begins. The next morning, Olivia stood in front of a packed room at the precinct. Every officer, every detective, every captain was present. She held a thick file in her hands, her expression cold and unreadable. This department, she began, her voice carrying through the silent room, has a history. Some of it we can be proud of. Some of it we cannot ignore. She paused. Then she opened the file. And one by one, she read the names. Names of officers who had used their badge as a shield for their racism. Names of men who had abused their power, covered up their crimes, destroyed lives. And then she reached the final name. Officer Jake Carter. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Carter froze. She lifted her gaze, her eyes piercing. Officer Carter, would you like to explain why your name appears in over a dozen misconduct reports related to racial profiling? Murmurs spread through the room. She continued, her tone like steel. Or why multiple body cam footages were mysteriously lost under your watch. More whispers. Carter's throat went dry. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because she wasn't done. She had saved the worst for last. A large screen behind her flickered to life, and then the footage played. Real, unedited, undeniable proof. Carter's past exposed for the entire department to see. Public humiliation. The fall of Carter. The first clip. A black teenager, terrified, hands up, pleading, while Carter mocked him. The second clip. A black father pulled over for no reason, Carter smirking as he tore apart his car, looking for an excuse to arrest him. And then the final clip, the one that sealed his fate. The traffic stop with Olivia. The entire room watched in stunned silence as Carter's own voice echoed through the speakers. Do you not understand English? I said step out of the damn car. His tone, dripping with arrogance. His behavior, textbook abuse of power. And then, Olivia's quiet, haunting words. You have no idea who I am. The moment the clip ended, the silence was deafening. Carter felt his pulse hammering, his hands shook. And then Olivia spoke the final words that shattered his world. Officer Carter, she said, her voice calm but deadly. You're done. The moment of justice stripped of his power. Two senior officers stepped forward. Jake Carter, one of them said, hand over your badge and weapon. Carter's body stiffened. No, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. He looked around, desperate, searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. But all he saw were cold stares. Even his closest allies, Brooks and Hensley, refused to meet his eyes. He had been abandoned. Your badge, Carter. His fingers trembled as he reached for the badge on his chest, the same badge he had once used as a weapon. Now it was being ripped away from him. He slowly placed it on the table. Then his gun, his final symbol of power, gone. He was no longer a cop. He was nothing. Real justice. The final blow. Carter turned to Olivia, his face pale, his jaw clenched. You think you've won? He hissed. You think this is over? Olivia stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, Carter, she said, a slow smirk forming. This isn't the end. She leaned in. This is just the beginning. And then she nodded. Behind her, two federal agents entered the room. Jake Carter, one of them said, you are under federal investigation for civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. Carter's breath caught. His legs nearly buckled. His nightmare wasn't just losing his job. His real nightmare was just starting. Olivia watched as the agents took him away. His reign of terror was over, and justice had finally been served. Carter's legs felt heavy as he stepped out of the precinct. His head was pounding, his ears still ringing with the whispers and murmurs from inside. The walk of shame felt longer than ever. Every officer he had once commanded respect from, every cop who had once laughed at his racist jokes, backed him up in his lies, was now watching him like he was dirt. The badge was gone, the gun was gone, and with them, his entire identity. For years he had played this game, bending the system in his favor, knowing that the blue wall of silence would always protect him. But Olivia Parker? She tore that wall down with her bare hands. And now he was nothing. He reached the doors, but just as he was about to step out, he felt her presence. He turned slowly. And there she was. Standing at the top of the staircase, arms crossed, a cold, victorious smirk on her face. Not a single word was exchanged, because she didn't need to say anything. Her eyes alone said it all. "I warned you, you just didn't listen." Carter felt rage boiling in his chest. He wanted to spit some insult, throw some threat, anything to regain control. But deep down, he knew. There was nothing left to say. She had won. The power shift was complete. And as he turned away and walked out of the building, he knew he wasn't coming back. That night, Olivia stood in her office, looking out at the city through her window. For the first time since she took this job, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The war against corruption wasn't over, but today she had won a battle that mattered. Or so she thought. Because outside the precinct, someone was watching. A dark figure sat in a parked car, his eyes locked on Olivia's office window. Detective Mark Reynolds. A seasoned cop, old school, respected by many. But underneath the badge, just another racist in power. He took a slow drag from his cigarette, a smirk forming on his lips. "Olivia Parker," he muttered under his breath. "She thinks she's fixed this department?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "She has no idea what's coming." And with that, he flicked the cigarette onto the pavement, the embers still burning. The war wasn't over. It had just begun.